Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the RYA Raymarine Training Conference supported by Gallagher. Well, my name is Ian Walker, the RYA Director of Racing, and those of you that followed the British sailing team or our RYA social media channels from Tokyo this year might have caught some of my updates, or Ian's insights as they were called, from Tokyo 2020. Or was it Tokyo 2021? Well, Richard kindly invited me to join you here today to share a little more insight from behind the scenes in Tokyo, and also to take a glance at what lies ahead in Paris 2024. So we've got 45 minutes. Hopefully I'll leave some time at the end for some questions. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat. Keep it clean, please. And I'll do my best to answer them at the end. Well, Tokyo was certainly an Olympic Games like no other, hopefully never to be repeated. I guess it will always be known as the COVID Games. Well, Beijing are doing a good job right now of competing for the title of COVID Games. But for sure, looking back, I don't think we'll ever see another Olympics like it. I'm going to take us back right now to the decision the IOC made in March 2020 to postpone the Games. And there'd been a lot of debate whether it was going to be cancelled or postponed, or whether it was going to be held. We didn't know building up to that. And we all had our own challenges. And I'm sure many of you had some tough times at that time when you think back to March 2020. But can you imagine what it felt like for some of the athletes in our team? You know, we had the likes of John Gimson, who'd been trying for 16 years to qualify for the Olympic Games. And he finally qualified with his crew, Anna Burnett, only to be told that the Games might not happen. And Ailey McIntyre, of course, Mike McIntyre's daughter, Mike McIntyre, who I remember winning Olympic gold medal in Seoul in 1988. Well, she grew up with the gold medal hanging outside her bedroom in a cabinet, dreaming of nothing else other than winning a gold medal, had tried repeatedly to qualify, and now it felt like that dream might be taken from her. And spare a thought also for Emma Wilson, you know, young Emma Wilson, who qualified for the Games, first Olympics, you know, really excited for the opportunity, only to maybe have all the doubt that it might not happen at all. So what did we do as a team? Well, thinking back to it, at the time, the team were in Parma preparing for Princess Sophia Regatta, which always happens in the early spring period. Pretty much everybody was out there. And if you think back to when things closed down, it happened incredibly quickly. I think we had something like 48 hours to get everybody out of Parma. And there was a lot of confusion as to what would happen if you got stuck. And Parma's not an easy place to get home from. You've got to, first of all, get the ferry off of the island with, I think we had something like 30 ribs and goodness knows how many boats and sailors. The sailors in many ways were the easy bit because you could go on an aeroplane. So we called it the Great Escape. And I guess that's where the team, you know, really swung into action, all the logistics and ops team behind the scenes to try and get everybody out and make sure everybody was safe. I'm sure you've all got your own stories of that period too. And then I guess as first responders, or you know, as we learn on our first aid courses, the next job was for us to stabilize the situation, particularly with regards to the Olympic team. So once everybody was back. Generally, they live in and around the Weymouth and Portland area. It was a question of looking out for their mental and physical health, and that involved, you know, regular check-ins. We risk assessed every sailor in the team. And worked very closely with the coaching team just to make sure that everybody was dealing with the situation okay. But you know, I think one of the skills the sailors do have generally is to look ahead and not to rue on what's gone before. So I think very quickly, once we'd stabilized the situation, it was right. Okay, this is the situation. We don't know when the Games is going to be. We've got to imagine it is going to happen. You know, how can we use this situation to our advantage? What can we do? And actually, it was really interesting because for probably the only time in many of these sailors' careers, they had an opportunity to actually reflect on what was going on. They couldn't go sailing. All they'd ever known was to go sailing and training. And now they weren't allowed. They were locked in their homes. And so we used that time to reflect, as I say, to carry out, you know, lots of conversations with their coaches or other technical staff online, you know, to think about where are our knowledge gaps, you know, what can we actually do and how can we use this time? The RYA wide set up the Sail from Home program, which covered, you know, the youth and junior program as well, just to try and, you know, keep people busy, if I'm honest, and also to raise the level of knowledge across all of the teams. And of course, one thing they could do was get fitter. And we very quickly emptied the gym and bought up as much gym equipment as we could, so that every single sailor effectively could set up a home gym when we went into that lockdown period. And it's really interesting when I look back on some of the fitness gains that were made by the Olympic team over that period, and maybe that is something that really helped us out in Tokyo. So then, of course, once we got through the original lockdown, sailing did well, thanks to other colleagues here at the RWA lobbying government and getting us back on the water. I think we were back on the water as early as May, using an elite sport exemption. Very strange time where you couldn't mix at all. You couldn't even, sit with your coach. Debriefings were done over the phone or online, but nevertheless, they were back out racing. And the other thing we did, back out training. Racing would have to take a little bit longer, particularly international, because of the travel bans. I think mentally, one of the most important things was putting people's mind at rest about the Olympic Games. And so one of the key things about that was to reconfirm the selection of the team. So the Olympic selectors were quite bold and made that decision very quickly to say, look, whenever the Games is going to be, we will take the same group of sailors. And looking back, that was an important thing, because there were so few events between then and the Games. Even if you had wanted to reselect the team for any reason, it would have been very hard to do so. So over the next 18 months, you'll be no stranger to many of the practical challenges we had. Obviously, the uncertainty, constantly changing government rules and guidelines, the travel restrictions, and again, the restrictions to leave the country, the restrictions wherever you were trying to get to, the extra cost of testing. And I guess I needn't remind many of you of the impact of Brexit and the fact that this all came at the same time. So it feels like, certainly from a management side, it was just a constant barrage of trying to provide the right advice to the sailors, trying to push the boundaries in terms of what we were allowed to do in order to retain our competitiveness, but try and make sure that we were also, following the government guidance. I say guidance loosely because, of course, we had the guidance and we had the legislation, and then we also had what Boris or different ministers said from time to time. And I think looking back, I think, everybody had their own journey through that, and that goes for everybody across all walks of life. And, there was no one easy answer. We just had to respond and be really agile and work our way through it. I think the other thing to bear in mind was the impact on the rest of the team. We were really focused on those going to the Olympics. But of course, if you didn't qualify for the Olympics, it's very hard for you. You've this period where all the attention is on the Olympics team, but you sort of think to yourself, well, it's only going to be 6 months or 9 months, whatever it is, and then of course we'll be full steam ahead for Paris 2024. Well, all of a sudden that was extended out for the best part of 2 years. So we really sort of separated the team, and we really we started something called Project 2024, and it was all about, right, okay, the rest of us who aren't involved in Tokyo, let's just start planning on 2024. Again, we might not have that many resources because the resources are trained on the Olympic team, but that doesn't mean we can't make forward steps and progress. It's been hard on that group, partly because they haven't been able to do the events they need. And of course, when you're at the earlier stage of development, one thing you need to do is lots and lots of events to get that experience. So finally, the Games were on, and we had to get to the Games, and we had a big team, 44 staff, 44 in our team, of whom 15 were sailors. So ratio of two support staff to every sailor. And as one of those support staff, I can tell you, in the build up to going to Tokyo, I was terrified of being that person that might get a positive test. We had to test every day for 2 weeks. And in total, over the course of the whole event, fag packet maths, I worked out that we'd done over 2,500 COVID tests between us. And of course, they all had to be negative. And one positive test would have meant either you couldn't travel, or you would have exposed somebody to being a close contact. And, I could have directly negatively impacted the Olympic performance of one of these young sailors. So it was, again, a really strange time. And I remember at the time before we traveled, it was the European Football Championship, and lots of people were watching the football matches together. And I remember one of the games, just before getting on the flight, I actually had to sit in the garden and watched it through the window because I was so terrified of catching COVID from any of my friends. But anyway, finally we got on the flight. And we arrived out in Tokyo and made our way down to Sagami Bay. And Sagami Bay is about an hour and a half south of Tokyo. You can see on the slide there, it's a big open bay facing south, the Pacific Ocean. The surf beaches all along that part of the coastline, very popular tourist place for people coming out of Tokyo. And the stars on the slide, on the left-hand side, you've got Enoshima, which is the marina. And on the right-hand side, the two red stars there is Hayama, which is the place that we developed as our base. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And Enoshima, this is a shot here of the Olympic Marina. This is the Olympic Marina from 1964. And actually, looking at it, apart from the heat and humidity, it bears a remarkable similarity to Weymouth in the way that it sticks out into the bay. Quite a small marina for a modern day Olympics, but it was great that they were able to reuse those facilities. And the games was odd. I mean, the games was odd because we had no spectators. You had no family or friends there. Sometimes that's a good thing because there's less distraction. No scared to mix with any other nations. So scared were we of getting a positive COVID test. It was masked at all time in the boat park. But on top of that, we just didn't even really want to mix with anybody else. And of course, we were there a long time. I was there 5 weeks in total. Some people were there a little bit longer. And I think one of the really strange things at the end of the games was not to be able to, let your hair down, celebrate success, mix with other teams, share stories, some of that camaraderie, which is what the Olympics is so well known for. The opportunity to go to the Olympic opening ceremony or closing ceremony, that was not there for it. So I think that was really sad. And another sad thing was the fact that we couldn't really enjoy the Japanese hospitality and culture. It's an amazing country. They were so kind, and despite what you read in the press, the population were genuinely pleased to have us there. And it was really tragic that we weren't able to really enjoy that to the full. But of course, enjoyment was always going to be linked to success. I mean, it is always, but when there's very little else, it was even more important for us to do well. And the good news, of course, is that Britain did do well. This was our third most successful Olympics ever. Thinking back, Sydney, I think we got 3 gold and 2 silver. Beijing, I believe we won 6 medals. But in Enoshima, we came home with 3 gold, a silver, and a bronze. So, a very successful games for the team. And I have to say, I don't know if it is because of all the COVID restrictions, but we had probably the most cohesive team spirit that we've ever had. I mean, we kind of had to, because there was nothing else you could do. We were locked in our accommodation, all the time. And so we only had ourselves for company. And I think actually that brought out the best in everybody in terms of how we worked as a team. So looking back to it seems a long time ago already. I was thinking about, what were the highlights for me? Well, probably, I guess, starting at the beginning of the games, of course, Hannah being the flag bearer, the first female sailor to carry the flag. I love this slide because if you look at the picture on the left, Hannah looks roughly the same size as Mo, and then you see the reality on the photo of the giant British rower and the diminutive 470 helm Hannah, and that was actually them setting up to go out on the parade. And we had a lot of discussion about that, but of course we were really terrified that she and Ailey went with her. That was a risk to the team, going out of our environment, being exposed to all these contacts, and that if she then got a positive test, that could have had a big impact on the whole team, even though within our team base, we were also going to great lengths to make sure that we weren't close contacts of each other. There was a limit. So, that was a big thing. And it was really nice that although we couldn't go to the opening ceremony, the rest of the team all got dressed up in their parade gear in the main room in our accommodation block. And everybody was cheering when Hannah stepped out. So I think that was a really great way of getting things started, making the Olympics feel real, and getting people to sort of believe and understand that they were part of a bigger thing. The Team GB, the British Olympic Association, did a great job of talking about one team. We are one team, and trying to get that sense of pride and passion instilled in the sailors, and the support staff did a great job with that. Moving on to the racing, I guess for me, a couple of sort of international highlights. I think, hats off to Robert Scheidt on the left there. 48 years old. He was in medal contention in the laser, or the Ilka as it's now known, halfway through. Would have been staggering to think that he could perform at that level in almost certainly the competitive Olympic class. He slipped away. I think he finished 8th. And of course, Annemarie Rindom, who dominated the female version of the Ilka and who then completely fell apart in the last days of the racing and very nearly threw away her medal. I'm trying to recall the story now, but I think she had one very bad race, and then in the last race of the series, she decided to try and take out the Dutch girl and ended up getting a second yellow flag, I think it was. And she wasn't sure whether she was then allowed to compete because the start was recalled and she didn't know whether she was allowed to restart or not. She decided not to. And in fact, she could have done that last race. So she ended up having to carry, I think it was a 26th. And all of a sudden, it was all on the medal race, which she finished 7th out of 10. But she did win, and I was very pleased that she did win because she thoroughly deserved it. But it just goes to show the effect of pressure in that Olympic Games environment. I think Emma Wilson is really worthy of a mention. I love this photo. This was her. I think this was the first of the races that she won in the Olympics. She and I just love the smile on her face. And that is my memory of Emma at the Girls. She just went there to enjoy it. She and her coach, Barry Edgerton, their strategy the whole way through was to just be positive, enjoy the experience, and what will be, will be. And actually, on reflection, she missed the gold medal by 2 points or 1 place in the medal race. And she had an OCS in a race that she won, having already won, I think, 2 races that day. So she really deserved and could have won the gold medal, although judging by the smile on her face, she was just utterly elated to get that fantastic bronze medal. And what a star of the future. And she's made a great start as well to her IQ foil career. I think this slide is something I'm going to always have in my mind, because this is the finish of the 49er men's medal race, and this is the margin between first and second in that race, with the British boat just winning by a bowsprit or half a bowsprit. And that meant that they got the one boat between them and the New Zealand world and Olympic champions and America's Cup champions, Pete Burling and Blair Tuke. And I guess what this says to me is it's a reminder of just how small the margins are between first and second, or between winning and losing. And I think this is the way all sport has gone, but Olympic sailing, the margins are tiny. And for Dylan and Stu to win the gold medal, Stu now retiring, they'd spent 4 years trying to beat Pete and Blair and dreaming of taking the crown. So it was an incredibly exciting day. In the 470 women's race, of course, we had the controversy. It ended with gold medals for Hannah and Ailey, but we had the controversy in the medal race with the French protesting, saying that they'd deliberately given up places to make sure that the French finished third overall rather than second overall. This did leave a bad taste. I really felt that the protest should have been withdrawn. It never had any grounds. It was never going to go anywhere. And hats off to the girls who really sailed an outstanding regatta. And it never looked in doubt that they were going to win. They were just so solid and incredible. Because if you saw what they're like behind the scenes, we're talking about individuals who were too nervous to eat for large percentages of the regatta, and yet on the water, they had the coolest heads out there. So quite extraordinary performance from them. We haven't quite forgiven the French yet, but we've got to be nice to them because the games are going to be in Marseille in a few years' time. And then, of course, we had Giles Scott, another double Olympic champion, who did his best to lose his gold medal in the medal race, where he thought he was over, or no, he feared he might have been over, and there was an OCS. He wasn't over, returned to restart the race, ended up starting from last place and looked to be all but out of it at the last mark. Somehow managed to get inside a couple of boats and to steal the gold medal right on the finishing line. I couldn't even watch that. We were all standing on the wall cheering, and I'm not even sure we knew whether he'd won it or not at the end. And then the last slide of this lot, this is a bit of fun, really. John and Anna, what a great performance from them, which they're already carrying on into the next cycle. And even Gary Lineker got to tweet about their performance, mistaking Ian Percy there in the tweet for Jurgen Klopp. I have to say, there's quite a strong lookalike there. So a lot of drama, a lot of success. But it's not all about the success. I mean, our other sailors, they all put up a great fight. Luke and Twiggy in the 470, they were in a medal position, I think, until the penultimate day. Probably sailed the regatta of their lives, but fundamentally, they weren't quick enough in the lighter winds. And as the wind speed fell away during the week, they slowly slipped back. But I think the great thing for Luke and Twiggy is they can reflect on a really well sailed regatta, and they left it all out there. Elliot Hansen, he had a tough games. He had tough games because he was recovering from injury, wasn't fully fit, particularly when it was windy. Actually, he had quite a lot of windy races, but even then he was right in the fray until he got a second yellow flag, which dropped him out of the medal race. And had he not got that second yellow flag for pumping or ooching or whatever it was upwind, he would have been in the medal hunt. So he actually sailed a good regatta, although the results don't show it. Tom Squires, same thing. He was right in the hunt. Just needed one more windy day to be in contention. He definitely liked the breeze. And the same was true of Charlotte and Saskia and the 49er FX. Spare a thought for them. They went out and I think they won the first two races. They were leading the regatta by 20 points halfway through. And of course, Charlotte was Dylan's fiance. So on that day, she had to deal with the mixed emotions of her own dreams being shattered in terms of the Olympic medal, but celebrating Dylan's success and not to mention Ali Young, who didn't have a great regatta, predominantly sailed in lighter air, and Ali, of course, was a real champion of breeze. But I think one of the great things about all of these sailors is how well they supported everybody else, and I hope that when they reflect on the games, they'll really think about how they contributed to the whole. So a few more facts on the games. So just a few things to reflect on. So the gold medal was decided in 3 classes before the medal race, just thinking about formats moving forward. It was an absolute games for the favourites. I haven't quite understood why, particularly when everyone had such a different build-up. But the favourites won in 7 of the 10 events. And I think in the other 3 events, it was the second favourites who won. And everybody who won a gold medal in Tokyo had either won the World Championship in the cycle or had won an Olympic medal, with the exception of the Ilke, and I think he was in the top 3 in every single world. So it was absolutely a games for the favourites. Maybe that was because there was a range of conditions, so the favourites came out on top. And it was a terrible games for Japan. The host country won no medals, and if you think about it, they were the only country that was able to train in those waters, so they should have had the biggest home advantage ever. But they took home no medals. I have to say, though, they were fantastic hosts. And just reflecting on Olympic sailing as a whole, since 2000, which is the advent of lottery funding in Great Britain, 19 different countries have won Olympic sailing medals. And in Tokyo, there were 16 different nations who took home the medal. So the medals are definitely, the sport is getting more universal. But looking back, it's anything but universal. Since 2000, only 5 nations have won half of the Olympic medals. And I'm pleased to say that a third of the Olympic medals have been won by Great Britain, including 25% of the gold medals. Helped, of course, by the Finn class, where we've won 6 gold medals in a row. And we won't be having the Finn, sadly, in Marseille. What was it like in Tokyo? Well, it was hot. It was probably not as hot as we feared, or as it could have been. It was predominantly light to medium winds on shore, although we did have a couple of offshore shifty days. It was pretty much, I think, what the weather forecast would have told you it was going to be, with the exception of a typhoon, which are very prevalent at that time of year. And as I've talked about, it was a strange game. It's really strange to do an event where you don't mix with your competitors at all. It would have been a nightmare, because we try and spike out the competitors. We wouldn't have had that chance back in my day. So the team lived in Hayama. So as I've said, we were very fortunate. We'd built this relationship in Hayama The picture there with the vans is the entrance to what is a conference center, a 48-bedroom a conference center for an insurance company. And that meant that we could have our own environment. We had our own catering team, we had our own games room, we had physio rooms, we had meeting rooms, and of course, even Giles, the Olympic champion, could walk around in his Olympic dressing gown with his Union Jack cup of tea. And of course, the favorite activity was sitting on beanbags, watching the Olympic action from up in Tokyo itself. So we created a really good environment. I think the catering is really important. And one of the reasons we were allowed to stay there was because we built this relationship with the town. We'd done sailing days with the local schools. We built up a team of Japanese volunteers. We had a relationship with the mayor. And when it came to the crunch, the mayor took responsibility for our team and said, look, we will make sure that the British team don't, endanger any of the local population. And we were even allowed out in the park. That's Adam May, I think, staring at the carp. But I can't tell you, when you're locked in a hotel for 5 weeks, to be able to actually get some outside space. And it was sort of 6 o'clock in the morning. They had to shut the public park from all the local public. Not there's many out at 6 in the morning, and we were able to go for a run or just walk around and gather our thoughts. And there's some shots there with the locals. So we had a great time, became very, very fond of Hayama, and we're very, very grateful to them. The volunteers had to do all of our shopping, and they would do anything we wanted, even to help me buy a present for my wife when I came back home. So we traveled from there across the bay. I showed you that slide earlier by RIB. That was one of my jobs. Brad and myself, we drove to RIBs, and we shuttled the athletes and coaches back and forth on demand. It meant that the sailors could get from the accommodation to the venue in under 30 minutes. And of course, we're not allowed to have any exposure at all to the local population. And the shot on the right was a little cafe, which would have been great in a normal times, but we were able to set up a little hub there where we would sit, watch the games. I would sit there watching all the racing on the tracking, looking for any potential penalties or protests that might arise, and then of course shuttle people back and forth. So why did we do well? If I had to sum it up, I think obviously we had a good team. We had several returning Olympic medalists. You've got to have good athletes. When you've got the likes of Hannah Mills and Giles Scott, Stu Bithell, that puts you in a good place. And I think the extra year really helped young Emma Wilson as well to take that step up onto the podium. We had a really strong coaching and support team. And just about everybody had been and competed in the Olympics or been to the Olympics as a coach before. So very experienced support team, and lots of people, the sailors could turn to for help or advice, or if they were concerned or just wanted a chat. We made a critical decision in 2018 to spend the whole summer training in Enoshima, and a lot of our competitors focused on the World Championships in Denmark. We took the decision that because of the difference in sea state, we would spend that time in Japan. And of course, when we were then not allowed to train there in 2020 in the build-up, it meant that we had more time in venue than most other countries. I think that was important. I think the selectors' decision to reconfirm the team, and I have to say, I think that the athletes' attitude to the COVID situation, to the lockdown, they never cease to amaze me with their positivity. They didn't dwell or they took the view that they couldn't control whether the games was going to happen or not. We've got to just focus and assume it's going to happen and make sure we're ready when it does. And I'm not sure I would have had the mental strength to do that myself. And there's a great shot there of all our medalists. The other thing was heat acclimatization. So one thing we really could do was try and adapt. And particularly, I think of Hannah and Ailey in the test event, really concerned about the heat. It was up to 40 degrees on some days in the test event. So we did a lot of training. I think there's another slide coming, which has a picture of the setup we had in the gym. So we built greenhouses in our training facility in Portland, which could ramp the temperature and humidity up to 35, 40 degrees. And then the athletes would go in and do 1 hour sessions on the bike or on the rower or on the erg or whatever was their chosen way of training. So we sort of preset our bodies and had got acclimatized prior to traveling out to Tokyo. And I think the environment that we set up in Hayama and all the work that put into making sure we had good accommodation and the right food and relations with the locals and we were comfortable there, I think that all was really positive. I think the team spirit I've already mentioned. I think particularly I love the picture here, the bottom right. If you look at the people who haven't got medals on, the likes of Elliot, Twiggy, I think Ali, everybody is smiling, and I like I say, I think that is a reflection, I think, of how strong the team spirit was. It's pretty disappointing if you go to the games and don't win a medal. You really just want to get on the plane home and hide in the corner. But they all stood up. They all supported their teammates. And I think that really made a difference. And I think the final thing is that nothing went wrong. We had no unexpected, and which was good for me because I think my role was there to deal with the unexpected, to support Mark Robinson, the Olympic manager, but to deal with unexpected problems. And believe me, we've had plenty of those in the past. I can think of death threats for Ben Ainslie in Sydney. We've had family issues. We've had police issues, all sorts of things with the embassy, all sorts of things come at you during the Olympic Games. But I think the fact that, it was a COVID Games kind of insulated us from a lot of that. So that was Tokyo. Hopefully I've shared a little bit of behind the scenes of what happened out there. But of course, now we're looking ahead and our sport is changing fast. And you only have to look at this slide to realize, looking along the bottom row of photos, 5 of our 10 events are foiling events. 4 of those are board events. And really left in the sort of more traditional sailing, you've just got single-handed sailing, skiff sailing, and a mixed 470. So it is changing, whether we like it or not. That's driven by the IOC Agenda 2020. The focus is on youth. It's on gender equity, appealing for the TV. And of course, increasingly, sustainability is going to become a really big focus for both World Sailing, the IOC, and of course, the RYA. So I think, if we don't change, if we don't modernize, sailing would be very, very vulnerable. And this has caused a lot of difficulties at World Sailing, where you've got the more traditional sailors who don't want change against the people who realize that it's change or be changed or be dropped, perhaps, from the Olympics. Just talking about being dropped, some of you might be interested in the double-handed mixed offshore event. What happened to that? Without going into the whole saga, I think the IOC decided it was too expensive both to host the event and for countries to develop regattas and athletes in that event. I'm really keen on offshore sailing, particularly short-handed and particularly mixed. But I have to say, I think it would have been very hard to host that in 2024. Not the games itself, but everything else, like just hosting regattas. We don't have fleets of identically matched one design keelboats ready to go. I'm not even sure how we would have done an Olympic trials. I'm not sure how they would have qualified the countries to go. It would have been expensive to set up all the infrastructure, even though at the games, it would have been awesome. It would have been 24 hours a day. We could have had online games working alongside it. And I think that was the real attraction, especially with France being such big fans of offshore sailing. So, great idea, but I think it just became a bit unworkable in practice. So, looking ahead, what are our big challenges? Well, I've mentioned the repeat medalists, that we are losing some big stars of the sport. And what these photos show here are Hannah Mills, Luke Patience, and Giles Scott talking to the rest of the British sailing team. There's been a big focus on trying to create the legacy, pass on the knowledge. And it was just fantastic to be at our camp and just hear the young sailors just asking all their questions, and hats off for the older sailors who are, really willing to try and share their experience and help the team. So we're really conscious of that and working towards that. We're also really conscious of how strong the French will be in Marseille. The French are strong anyway. They're going to be even stronger in Marseille. Marseille is going to be a tough venue. Urban venues are always tough. They're expensive. They're logistically hard. How are we going to create a similar atmosphere to what we had in Enoshima? I don't think we're going to be able to. There is an argument that it's going to be too much like home. And I think actually the British team tend to excel when things are really difficult. Potentially an event that is not particularly hot, cold, far to travel, difficult linguistically, whatever it is, none of those are things that we can leverage to our advantage. It's getting harder and harder to qualify. There's fewer and fewer spaces at the Olympics. The athlete numbers come down. Other countries are getting more experienced and more competitive. So even qualifying for the country to go to the Olympics, especially as they try and retain more places for other continents. So it's not all European nations. When you look at the new events, like the kiteboarding and the IQ foil, we've got new formats, a lot more jeopardy in those formats, such as knockout formats, all on the last race, where it's going to be much harder to guarantee or to try and guarantee a win in that than compared to the Finn, where we kind of knew that Giles was going to be competitive, weeks and months out. Dare I mention Brexit? I'm sure that's the bane of many of your lives. But Brexit is a challenge. We can only train 90 days every 180 in Europe now. That's a real challenge when you want to spend the whole winter training abroad. And of course, another challenge we all face is trying to be more sustainable. And, there was hundreds and hundreds of coach boats out in Tokyo, and that will change. That will be cut down. And we're starting to think about, alongside the RWA sustainability strategy, what can we do to reduce our carbon footprint? We've been looking, this is actually an electric rib, which I test drove last week. There's no doubt this is coming. I think the technology is not quite there for us at the moment, simply because we need to, we spend such long days at such high speed on the water. But certainly I can see the rise of electric ribs, or even just reducing ribs and rib sharing, whatever it is. We're also looking at alternatives for coaching, such as using drones. Again, that's got a lot of challenges around it, but there's more and more technology, and I think technology and data, that is the buzzword. There's so many things now we can measure. This is a slide. This is a picture of what we call a starting heat map of Luke and Twiggy at the Olympics and where they started on the line. And we can create these for all the competitors and look at the trends, and where there's no end of amount of data you can now look at to try and both in training and in racing. Of course, you can get completely lost in that data, but as a team, we are focusing on trying to learn, how can we use this data? We're constantly reminding ourselves that, like in COVID, we've got to be agile. We mustn't be afraid to try new things. We've done that with the way we've done talent programs for kiteboarding, and of course we've got to remember not to forget the basics. As I don't hesitate to remind people, sailing is the most complicated sport in the world, but it is also quite simple. If you get a good start, if you sail fast and you make the right decisions, you generally do quite well. Unfortunately, the devil is in the detail that lies behind that. So one thing I can assure you all is that there will be no complacency, not while I'm around anyway, in the British sailing team. I think that's, maybe there's one more slide just to close. I think it's just a happy slide of the team out in Tokyo. So I think I've left a little 5 minutes for questions. I think the last thing I'd really want to say, other than wishing you all well and hoping that you enjoy the conference today, is just a reflection on the role that you all play in growing the sport. I imagine that most of you, like me, you're probably a very keen sailor. You may race, you may not. And I'm sure you're going to focus today on the content of courses, and you think a lot about what you teach. But to my mind, I think the most important role for any coach, for any instructor, for any teacher in a school is to share that passion for the sport. I'm sure you can all remember your good teachers at schools, the ones that enthused about their subject, and you can probably remember a few that didn't. But it is something that I remind our junior coaches and youth coaches, more than anything, is you've got to instill that passion on the people that you're working with and training. We are all salesmen and saleswomen for our sport, and I think that is our gift that we can give is the passion, enthusiasm to other people. I've been sailing now for over 40 years. I'm still learning things. I'm still discovering new tricks. I've even discovered cruising in the last few years, and I'm still making mistakes. Of course, it's an incredible sport. It's something that has something to offer everybody of all ages. It is open to all, and I think if there's one message I would like to share with you, it's to really just share your passion with everybody that you come into contact with, and that way we can all help grow the sport. So it's a few minutes left. If we have any questions, like I say, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. All right, okay, what have we got here? Due to the sailors isolating in their accommodation at the games, was there a favourite activity, and which sailor was the most competitive? Well, we didn't have a bar, I can tell you that. I think table tennis league was a popular one, but I think Stu Bithell was one of the inventors of hotel golf. We had a sort of mini golf that went all over the apartment, up and down the stairs and everywhere. And there seemed to be much hilarity when the golf came out. I don't know who was the best at that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. What have we got here? With the growth of wing foiling, do you think it will make it into the 28 games? That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, I guess there's wing foiling and there's wing foil racing. We are starting to see wing foil racing events. There is an argument that foiling boards is almost, could be the event. I think you could imagine an event where it was foiling boards, and you maybe did some races with a kite and some with a wing and some with a windsurf sail. But I suspect whether it makes it as an event is probably more of a political question. I think it's going to be very hard to drop kiteboarding when it's so new because of the cost and the effort involved in setting up those programs. So I think politically it's hard to drop something after one Olympics, although we have seen that before with women's match racing, I think. And I think IQ foil racing seems like it's absolutely booming. So I would have thought that's pretty safe. So yeah, I don't know, probably a little bit too early, but I wing foil. I think it's a great, it's great fun, and I'm pleased to see that the RYA has embraced that. What was the reception like back at Heathrow? Well, that was the moment, wasn't it, for to meet your friends and family, and yeah, it was pretty emotional. I think a lot of the sailors, particularly those that won medals, and the Olympic manager had spent most of the flight in first class drinking the stocks of Heineken. So I'm not sure how much some of them can remember of it, but no, it was good fun. The families were there; they'd made signs, and it was pretty emotional. Yeah, it was good fun. So I think looking at my clock, I'm pretty much there. So look, I hope you've enjoyed a little bit more insight into the games and a little bit of thought about what lies ahead in the future. Like I say, I wish you well. Hope the conference goes well today, and I hope that you all have a really fantastic year. So thanks for your time and enjoy the day.